Hey, good Monday morning to you. How's everybody doing today? It's good to see you all. It's good to be seen by everyone, too. Hang on a second. Just had to crank that audio down, make sure that I was not oversaturating you guys. How is everyone? How was your weekend? Um, I hope you got to spend some Mother's Day time with your moms, with your significant others, what have you. It's good to see you all, and I hope you're well. I had a pretty insanely busy and tiring weekend, and it's only because of it's sorry, it's only because of inclement weather yesterday, namely heat, that it was not even longer and more tiring. But I got to jump right back into it after the live stream today. So Friday, after I was done streaming, I immediately disassembled my entire thing here, my entire studio, to open up the space so I could drag my washing machine into the middle of it and disassemble it and repair it. And boy, howdy, I did that on Saturday, from Saturday about noon, 1 o'clock, until Saturday night. That was one of the most frustrating and hair pulling experiences I've had. And it was really only removing and putting a new rubber seal on the door. It's one of those front load style. But there's these two spring clips that you have to fit. I'm not even going to bore you guys with it. It was dirty, hard, difficult work, and I hated every minute of it. So, suffice to say, Saturday was busy. I didn't get to the lawn work. And of course, Sunday was Mother's Day, and we had a fine old time here. Made brunch for the missus. We went to IKEA to do some shopping, which actually benefited me because I got two elements of the new desk that I'm going to have here in the office. You guys won't see it, but it'll help me out quite a bit. So instead of having two disparate art tables that are very difficult to place and balance stuff on, I will have a single IKEA desk. I have the trestle legs, and I'm just waiting on them to contact me and let me know when they have the 72-inch surface that I want, because that is the size space I need. I've got two monitors, I've got a whole bunch of painting stuff, I've got my computer, so on and etc. So, yeah, that was this weekend. And then today, after this live stream, I gotta take my puppy dog to the vet. He's fine, just check up, and then buy groceries, and then cut the lawn this evening, etc., etc., etc. So I had a lot of domesticating to do. But anyway, let's talk about hobby stuff. Interesting bit of news. Now, one of my favorite miniature companies of all time, and they don't sponsor my videos. It's just a company. Is Dark Sword Miniatures. Dark Sword makes premium metal tabletop miniatures. They are, in my opinion, okay. So let me put this in perspective, in kind of an old school perspective. Man, I'm really goopy. Sorry, lots of pollen. Yeah, so James, you know what I'm talking about with having to tear appliances down and repair them. Um, so anyway, yes, with the back in the day, there were a whole lot of miniature companies that produce miniatures of, shall we say, varying quality. You had pretty good miniature companies, or pretty good quality miniatures, like from, say, Grenadier, all the way down to people who would sell those Prince August cast it yourself minis that just look like awful blobs, and everything in between. But in my opinion, back then, the premium company, like I want to have a finely sculpted and detailed mini, best top of the line, was without a doubt Ralpartha. And Ralpartha had been around since the 70s, right? Now, this isn't a knock on Ralpartha, okay? They're around again. They've come back around, and they're casting minis again. Thing is, a lot of their minis are older sculpts, and I just don't think they hold up as well against new minis. I'm sorry about that, if you're a Ralpartha fan. I always considered them, compared to the other companies that I mentioned, to be premium. That role these days goes just head and shoulders above everybody else to Dark Sword. Dark Sword Miniatures makes some absolutely unbelievably beautiful pieces. Now, in a close second, like if Dark Sword is a 10, 9.89 or even 9.9 would be Otherworld. But I think Dark Sword has got some pieces that, more than tabletop, they're art. They are pieces that just, like, I don't buy them because I think they're too good for my skills. So, I don't look much at Facebook anymore, for reasons I've already discussed. But I did have an occasion today, when I was setting up the live stream earlier, to glance at the news feed, and I saw the Dark Sword has purchased another company's assets and is now casting their minis. And I want to, let's have a quick gander at this, because I want to make sure that I've got this right. So let's see. I can't remember the company, but their product lines are Shadow Sea and Deep Wars. So they're nautical and ocean themed minis that Dark Sword has bought. But the real startling thing is that Dark Sword, and I never would have thought that Dark Sword would have gone this route, and yet here they are. Dark Sword is now selling STL files, which, if you've heard me talk about 3D printing, or you're familiar with it, you know what those are. If you're not, those are the files that you put into a 3D printer to get it to print stuff. Whether it's a filament printer or it uses resin. And I was very surprised by that, because that to me would be like, here's a perfect example. If back in the day, Ralpartha had gone and said, oh, we're going to sell home casting kits. Really? Because, like, if you go look at Dark Sword, and again, they don't sponsor me. I don't get anything from Dark Sword at all. If you go and look at Dark Sword's lines of minis, those are not... Just the level of sculpting on those minis, I mean... words fail me how just incredibly premium those minis are. I mean, I've painted one or two, but yeah, Dark Sword minis are just phenomenal. And that they're selling STL files is really kind of a shocker. That's now I 3D print, okay? You guys know I do. I've talked about it a lot. Hell, I've been on Jayashiro Finney's live stream, and I like the last time I was on, that's all I talked about was 3D printing. I am sorry, my phone is ringing in the background. I forgot to put it on mute. But oh god, I hate that. Anyway, so the I hate to use this term, but that's almost like Dark Sword is slumming it a little bit. Like I get it that a lot of people are doing like resin, you know, their own home resin castings, which is head and shoulder for doing figures, is head and shoulders above anything you can get out of a filament printer. I don't think there's any magic technology that's going to come out for filament printers that's ever going to approach what you can get with resin. It's night and day. So yeah, that's kind of real interesting. Now, as far as I can tell, they haven't cut back on shit. They keep introducing amazing miniatures. I mean, they do. You know, they've got like, for example, George R.R. Martin Masterworks. If you want to play a Song of Fire and Ice or a Game of Thrones themed game, and you want, like, I want a character for Tyrion Lannister, and I want to just use a dwarf out of my D&D sections, that's what they got. Now, these are the Song of Fire and Ice minis are based more on Martin's input on what the characters look like. They're not likenesses of the HBO TV show. So, you know, you'll get more of what the book would have you look at, but that's just an example of their dedication to craft, and that they're selling STL files now. That's pretty surprising. Now, these may be from those miniature lines that they acquired, rather than they just threw stuff together. And looking at the STL files, like STL scenery, land scenery, let's look at that. Let's just go over there and have a look at that. Yeah, I'm getting the feeling, looking at this scenery that they're doing, that this must be from that same company, STL Miniatures. Our STL scenery includes underwater scenery and miniatures, characters and war bands. We'll check that out. Yeah, all these tend to be very underwater themed. So I'm thinking maybe when they acquired that company, this was just all stuff that they had. So that's kind of my feeling on it. That it wasn't, they just didn't go buck wild and decide to you know, put everything out on the table and say, you can print our own stuff. Because honestly, like, some of the minis I've got, like, I bought one of theirs, it's now out of print, it's called The Summoning. And this thing is, like, it's a woman crouching, she's raising her hands, there's a magic candle in front of her. the whole thing is less than, because she's like kneeling on her knees and leaning back. It's like maybe the height of a nickel. Like if you took a US 5-cent piece and sat it up on its edge, it would be less than that tall. You can't print that out with any degree of accuracy, no matter what your settings are, with a filament printer, and you can't get that degree of resolution even out of a resin printer, in my opinion. It's just not there yet. So we'll see what goes on with that. I mean, you can already, there are lots of companies that do sell STL files. Like you can design your mini and then you can get the STL files for it from Hero Forge, for example. Daniel says, I like the new angle much better than the square wall, than square with the wall behind you. Yeah, I kind of thought this was a little bit nicer. You can still see the tchotchke shelf and the painting, and now you can see this awesome Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Oversized comic poster that I got a few years ago. So yeah, this is where I think I'm going to be from now on. But anyway, to continue, speaking of Facebook, Biagio Pasterno over on Facebook asked me about a gadget, and I wanna share this link here because I want to discuss this. Here we go. Well, I'm gonna copy the. Copy the link. Biagio asked me, is it Biagio or Biagio? I apologize, guy. I don't really. So there's that, and I'll share this over on Facebook and then YouTube. All right, and basically what it is it's a single handheld airbrush kit. And I find the picture of it on the website kind of funny because the person's holding it like this. You would never hold an airbrush like that. The paint would run out of the cup on the top. It wouldn't gravity feed properly, so on and etc. You would never hold an airbrush nozzle down. You can hold it at an angle, but you wouldn't want to hold it like that in the picture. A few YouTubers who do crafting stuff, painting stuff, better than me, I should add, have done reviews on these. So the price on it is $53. Now, full disclosure, I don't have one of these. I have an airbrush rig that uses a small standalone compressor that runs constantly off AC power and has a hose for the gun. The YouTubers who have looked at these, at least some of them that they've tried, have had middling to good reviews of them. I already have an airbrush. I have no want or desire to run out and get a new airbrush. If you already have an airbrush, should you get this? Should you just say, okay, hoses and everything, I'm going to set it aside? No, because, all right, let me click on the. So the upgraded model is nominally $120, and it includes a removable battery, which you can have charged, and you can then switch over. The built-in battery only lasts for 30 minutes. The removable battery lasts for an hour. I don't know where you would get a replacement battery. This looks fairly bespoke. Like you couldn't just hop down to Batteries Plus and say, hey, I want to buy 3 of these so I can keep airbrushing. For a tabletop hobbyist, if you don't already own an airbrush, and you're going to be using it for large scale airbrushing of one mini at a time, or for base coating many minis, this might be a viable solution. Again, I'm not going to run out and buy one because, and again, at $85 nominally, I mean, I don't know about these guys as far as, will this sale stay on and so on. My airbrush kit was only $50. I think it's $60 now. I mean, I got it a few years ago. There's been, supply chain issues with everything in the world. So prices on stuff has ticked up a little bit. But its set price is $50 or $60. This thing is anywhere from $53 to $85, and the battery swappable version is 120, anywhere from 75 to 120. If you're going to spend, this is just my opinion, if you're going to spend 75 to $120 on an airbrush, get one with a compressor and with hoses and so on. You may find that you want to use your airbrush all the time and a lot more frequently than just 30 minutes at a whack. Also, as you get to 30 minutes, if you're doing an entire army, let's say you've got an army of goblins, and so you're top coating them all green to come in and to base coat. Say you've got a couple of hundred of them. Do you really want to have to wonder whether or not your battery's going to last you through that entire thing to make sure everybody gets an even coat or two on them? If you've really got the itch to airbrush and you run out of battery, you're kind of stuck. That doesn't happen to me with mine. I plug it into the wall, I run the hose out, and away I go. Another thing to consider, I can put a moisture trap on my airbrush. It goes just below the bottom of the gun. It's a little clear jar that, as it says on the tin, stops moisture getting into the airbrush stream and doing things like causing orange peel and spatter. Can you put a moisture trap on this? If you live where it's exceptionally humid, like me, here in Central Florida, that moisture trap is key. I know some people who airbrush in Florida and they're like, no, you need two, and you need bigger ones. So, I don't really know how I feel about that. So, I don't know that would be for me. Let's see some comments over on YouTube. Hey, Cerulean. Hey, Paul. Good to see you guys. Welcome. It's always nice to see people on the streams. It always is. And I want to point out that right now, let me see, before we dive into the Henchmen and Hirelings thing, okay, so I'm still sitting at 658 subscribers. Folks, just your daily reminder, when I get to 1,000, online mini convention. That's right. We'll do just an entire day of gaming. We're going to play so many games virtually right here on the tabletop. I'll run it on Discord. You guys will be able to log in and play all kinds of games. I'm going to run Gamma World. I'm going to run first edition AD&D, original D&D, probably some Tales from the Loops, maybe some Fight in the Skies, maybe some Dungeon. We'll have to see. But when I hit 1,000, that's when we do it. I might even do a value add. I might do a face conceal You'll never have to see me again. So tell your friends, tell your family, tell your loved ones, subscribe, and hit that bell icon. All right. So, to the meat of today's discussion. Last Friday, if you weren't here last Friday, you can go watch last Friday's live stream. Don't do it now. But last Friday's live stream, we talked about hirelings in your AD&D game and their importance, because later editions don't really do hirelings. And that's a shame. That's a damn shame. All right. You know, when you talk about an adventuring party just being a group of 3 or 4 players going into a dungeon, you know, you ride 100 miles to the Forgotten Mountain, and then you go in the dungeon. We rode there. What happens to your horses during the week that you're inside the dungeon? You know, if somebody's gonna drag you out of the dungeon after you've been injured, you know, or if you got a character who's laid low for a week through some tragedy, like they're really severely injured or something like that, you know, who's gonna guard? And so that's what you need your hirelings for. And when you run into a band of 300 orcs as you're riding across the plains, you know, you've got to have troops of your own to deal with those situations. It's not always just about killing 4 or 5 of them and they turn tail and run away. So that's what we talked about, because, again, later editions don't cover that. This does. I'm going to answer Cerulean's question about painting, though. I'm not planning on doing so, but if I were to get into mini painting, what would the price be for a decent beginner setup? Okay, so if you're going to look at a great way to kind of get your feet wet, in my opinion, are some of the starter and how to paint sets that are put out by Vallejo and WizKids through their Nolzers line. You can get very compact how to paint kits. Now, how to paint kits today are much better than they used to be back when I was very young, and you got like absolute crap paints and one crap brush. Nowadays you get like half-size dropper bottles of otherwise the same paints and at least a couple of starter brushes. A kit like that, which gives you a wide range of paints and a couple of starter brushes and even a couple of minis to start practicing on, or a mini to practice on, will set you back about 30 or 40 bucks. It's not that expensive. If you want to go pick your basics line, I can do we can do an episode and just go over like some basic paints I think that should be in your starter set. And a bottle of paint runs anywhere from $2 to $3 each. So if you go with, say, you know, let's say $3 a piece at $15, or with 15 shades, and you don't really need that many, but 15 is a goodly amount. So you're looking at $45 plus a few bucks for brushes. So I would say $30 to $50. But to kind of come back to the henchman and hireling thing, last time we talked about hirelings and expert hirelings up to and including the sage. And so the question was asked, and I think it was Cerulean Knight, possibly it was Paul, may have been somebody else. The question was asked about the personalities of your hirelings and your henchmen and their stats and so on. What is each of them like? Now, as the DM, I can just wave my hand and say, this guy is taciturn, this guy is frivolous. This guy is meek and just glad to be here, and so on. But if you want to go by the book, there is a system whereby you can determine the disposition of non-player characters. Non-player characters, and this can cover anybody, not just your henchmen and hirelings. But first, it covers any bonuses that these NPCs might get for being dwarves, elves, gnomes, or halflings. Now, this is more for your henchmen, not your hirelings. Your hirelings are generally going to be fairly unexceptional. As a DM, you might want to say that, say, 1 in a dozen heavy foot perhaps has a slightly higher constitution. So instead of being from 0 to 7, or from 1 to 7 hit points, he's 2 to 8 hit points. But when it comes to alignment, appearance, sanity, very important, personality traits, and specific personality traits, the DMG has got you covered over on page 237. Like we might wind up with a, kind of a poor, neutral good guy or girl who's mature and unkempt, very stable. We rolled a 1 on that table. Is very stable mentally. They're optimistic. They're modest, diplomatic, but aloof, of active intellect. Their nature's to be soft-hearted. They are ascetic when it comes to their degree of materialism, scrupulously honest, foolhardy in terms of bravery. They're lusty morality-wise, of average piety to whatever they worship. They're energetic. They're thrifty financially. Their interests are hunting, and wines and spirits. And they have a collection of books and scrolls. See, I just built a person with the tables on page 237. I just did mental die rolls. You might want to have some physical dice out to do it, or you might just want to pick. But we have a system in place for determining all of those personality traits. And I think that can't be overstated how great that is. Let's see. Paul says, I'm doing better than Ravenloft, apparently. It's my first setting for D&D back in 2nd edition. And now 5e, you're not supposed to scare your players or trigger their sensibilities. Yeah. Yeah. They did go more Scooby-Doo. I was never a huge fan of Ravenloft by myself. Blasphemy, I know. It did start with 1e with I6, but Anyway, let's get back to those henchmen. Now, we talked about the hirelings. And, oh, did I lose my page? I think I did lose my page. Let me see if I can find this real quick. And while I'm looking for that, where hirelings are your workaday camp followers, types of characters who will tote that barge and lift that bale. Henchmen are non-player characters who have specific classes and abilities commensurate with those of player characters. If for whatever reason your party doesn't have a thief, and none of the players want to play a thief, you're like, what do? We need to hire a thief. We know we're going to have to pick locks. We know we're going to have to find traps. We know we're going to have someone hiding in the shadows and backstabbing and climbing sheer surfaces and on and on and on. What do? And then we get to henchmen. This is on page 34. Henchmen, whether male or female, are greatly desired by the discerning players, for they usually spell the difference between failure and success in the long-term view. What this means is having some extra skilled players with the party, people who are also getting experience, who are also advancing in levels, even if they're NPCs. These characters can make all the difference in the world. Plus, if you have a player whose character dies and they can't get resurrected or for whatever reasons, sometimes it's nice to have a character that they can just step into. Bob the Ranger, can I play him? There you go. Bob has leveled, he's acquired treasure, he's a known quantity in the party, he just steps up. But henchmen cover all of the playable classes. Fighter, magic user, cleric, thief, paladin, ranger, assassin, druid, monk, even bards. You can find henchmen for them. Now I say you can find henchmen for them. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to find exactly who you're looking for. Your party may decide we want to add a 4th or 5th or 6th or 7th or 12th or 15th. For an adventuring type who does not already enjoy the company of an entirely different campaign and party, you're going to have to put out feelers for them. You're going to have to show them the money. And there's a method for doing this. You can post notices in public for a cost of 50 gold pieces. That's 10 to 40% effective. I, as the DM, would roll the percentage dice and see if you catch the attention of someone or several someones. You can hire a crier. That's only 10 gold pieces, but that's only 1 to 10% effective. You can hire agents for 300. Well, that's 20 to 50. If you got some gold pieces, you want to scrape them together. You want to say, look, canvass the city. Canvass the area around the city. Tell people we are looking for adventurers to come and join our party. That costs money. And then, of course, frequenting inns and taverns. And basically, this is the fun one. Frequenting inns and taverns. Each method can be tried but once a month with any hope of success. Reduce the percentage chance of effectiveness of each method by 5% when used in combination. This reflects the duplication of effort. The special cost for frequenting inns and taverns is a combination of the price of a round of drinks for the house and a fee to the barkeep to mention the prospective employer to adventurers. For each 10 gold pieces, 50 gold pieces maximum, there is a 1 to 4% chance of reaching a henchman. Let's see. Up to 10 establishments can be worked, but for each visited, the effectiveness of the others is reduced by 1%, which again, I think speaks to duplication of effort. The people at this tavern may also be in the next tavern, and so on, or some of them. Therefore, the PC had better spend in excess of 20 gold pieces in payments to innkeepers and barkeeps if he or she is planning to try this method in more than a few establishments. And then there's an example given. And then there's a length of time for response. It's not going to be instant. These people can't just break out their mobile phone and text you, you know, especially if you've if you've hired agents to go out into a village that may be a half day's ride from the main city, from Das Kapital. So what of these guys? Okay, we've established how difficult it is to hire them and what they are. What do they bring to the table and why are they important? And this is just my 2 cents. This is just me weighing in. Well, as I stated, they're a fine resource to have to bring expert abilities to the party, not just to have a shield wall that can hopefully cope with goblins, orcs, kobolds, and maybe hobgoblins, but fall back as soon as anything with more than 1+1 hit dice shows up. They're actual adventurers. They require recompense, and they're going to want shares of treasure. They're going to want magic items, you know? It's like, ooh, this is a dagger +2 against regenerating creatures. Well, the NPC thief may say, I want that. You know, it was in a chest that I unlocked. And it's up to you as players to decide whether he's worth that. And if you're DMing and the players are a little reticent to give it over and, you know, the potion that he found, well, you know, his loyalty may suddenly come into question. Or he may stick with the party and say, these guys know where there's a lot of stuff. But you as the game master, suddenly you're making pickpocket rolls for him. So it's like, oh, you're keeping the potion of extra healing? Well, I'm, just going to roll and see if I can just pick that right back out of your pocket. So, these henchmen are exactly that. These are, just like hirelings, they're NPCs, but these guys are putting it on the line with your player characters in the dungeon. Let's see. Cerulean says, need a talent scout or foreman hireling to gather up some recruits. Yeah, that's basically it. That's Paul. Paul there. Is there a line between a story integrated NPC and a henchman? Generally speaking, unless you're going to have a specific NPC that comes and meets your players, in terms of AD&D, henchmen are kind of almost, they're quantum NPCs. They both exist and don't exist, but the players don't know until they observe them and change the waveform. And what I mean by that is, if the players say, look, we really want a ranger, we're going against the giants, no pun intended, and we want to hire a ranger, You as the dungeon master, as they utilize these methods, if they get lucky, let's see, fighters are the most common. You got a 44% chance of encountering a fighter, but of those, you'll only get a ranger on a D10 score of 1. Now, you as the DM, you may say, okay, well, these guys have specifically asked for a member of the Rangers Guild. You may just want to say, okay, a ranger answers your call, or a paladin answers your call, depending. But, and I would dare say that the odds of coming up with a paladin are even better than given there, depending on the nature of what you're doing. You know, if you're about to go into the Temple of Elemental Evil, that might net you a paladin right away if you're in, say, a large town like Verbabonk, right? But to answer your question, a story integrated NPC, you the DM plant, that NPC is going to be there regardless of what the players do or don't. All right. A good example of this would be what's his name? Is it Chert? No. There is a ranger that your characters can encounter in Hamlet, and I'm drawing a blank on his name all of a sudden. History is all about the cats, but did Schrodinger's henchmen ever get attention? But he's there regardless of what the players do or do not. He's a statted up ranger ready to go. That, I would say, is the difference. If the party goes into Hamlet and you, the DM, are using these rules to see if a wayfarer strolling through Hamlet happens to be a leveled adventurer, they may or may not find one. But if they go in the town and they interact with the NPC, whose name I can now not remember because I don't have my copy of T1 in front of me, then, you know, he's there, he's fixed. You don't have to go through and do any of the things noted in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So there's your difference. So these these hirelings, these hirelings, these henchmen, are they're, if you've got a small party and you've been through a couple of adventures and you've managed to collect some gold, and I mean your party is truly small, don't try and be the Avengers or the X-Men. Get some henchmen and get some hirelings, all right? It can be the difference between a dungeon master very obviously having to handle you with kid gloves and being able to use classic adventures. Henchmen are great NPCs to have in the party. They can create situations in the party like you have 8 players and you have a wonderful socialist system of, you know, gold is evenly distributed, magic weapons go to those who need them, and that's all wonderful. And then here comes a henchman. He's like, no, I want the +2 spear. I want the +2 plate mail. Yeah, okay, you know, you're talking about being fair and equitable, but guess what? I was standing at the front of the party. I was the guy that took, you know, a dozen attacks from a troll and almost died. And it may be over and over again. Particularly if you go through and you use the NPC personality, and this guy is greedy. He's greedy and chaotic neutral. All right? His attitude might be, look, I'm doing more than pulling my weight. I'm pulling the weight for all of you guys. I want your shit. That should come to me. So, it's just something good to keep in mind with these with these characters, or with these non-player characters. But do I think you should use them? Do I think these guys are worth using in your game? Absolutely. And there's a few other things to keep in mind too. One is morale. Regardless of if they're hirelings or henchmen, especially in the cases of hirelings. You know, if you've got 40 light foot and 40 heavy cavalry, and you're thinking you can take on the world, and a single adult red dragon flies over, those guys are all sub-hit dice monsters. Well, I'm sorry, all sub-hit dice individuals. Under the rules for dragons, depending on their age band, they just exude an aura of causing fear and panic in lesser individuals. Your 80 guys may scatter. Now, henchmen have a degree of loyalty to you. That loyalty is adjusted by how well you treat them, or how poorly you may treat them. And it even comes to a point where you could have a magic user refusing to cast spells, or a cleric refusing to heal. Just like, you know, you've withheld my pay for 3 adventures now. You've mocked my god. You know, I clearly requested a healing potion and the +1 mace you found. Or, you know, the Wand of Magic Missiles and the Ring of Spell Story. So no, I don't think it's, you know, when the enemy evil wizard shows up and says, "Join me or die," I, as the dungeon master, I may roll the dice and I may decide, you know what? Looking over here, looking at the conditions, look at that, 25. He breaks ranks and walks right over. And if the players start to wonder why, they've got to look at their actions. So, henchmen and hirelings, don't just hand them to the party to be used as pack mules, to be abused and have their stuff taken. They don't just show up to be robots, to be expended. Remember, these are individual personalities as much as any other NPC. And there's a whole system here for base loyalty. Let's just go down the loyalty here. Loyalty of henchmen and allied creatures. Adjusted loyalty score. 1 or less. None. Will attempt to kill, capture, or harm, or desert at the first possible opportunity. 1 to 25. Disloyal. Will always seek own advantage regardless of circumstances. You know? Throw me the idol. I throw you the whip. 26 to 50. Now you may think, 50, that's pretty good. That's an even shot. Little. Will seek advantage at the first sign of weakness. You know, you're getting your ass kicked. You know, you had me bury 500 gold pieces and told me it belonged to you. That ogre's got you right out on your uppers. See ya. But now we talk about the positives. 71 to 75. Fair. Will support cause if no great risk involved. You know, sure, I'm with you. 76 to 0. Loyal. Will always attempt to further the ends of the liege, even at great risk. And then you've got greater than 100. Fanatical. Will unquestioningly will serve unquestioningly and lay down life if necessary without hesitation. And how you get to that loyalty base is you have 50% plus or minus charisma adjustment. And you can bump that up. There are ways to increase that loyalty base modifier. Associated non-player character. Captured and enlisted, that's minus 15%. Are they a henchman? Well, that's plus 5% right away. A hired mercenary is 0. Hired mercenary short term, minus 5. They're only here for a paycheck. Slave, minus 30. I mean, think about that. The best you could get out of a slave would be fair, will support cause if great risk involved. If no great risk is involved. Then the length of their enrollment affects that. Training or status level, untrained or peasant. You're driving peasant levies before you, minus 25%. Trained regulars, plus 10%. And I'm just hitting a few points here. I'm not going over all of these. Let's see. Now, this is one, I like this. Pay or treasure shared, none, minus 30. Partial, late, or unfair, minus 10. Average, 0. Above average, choice shares, plus 5. Exceptional bonuses, gift items, plus 10. And then there's discipline. Firm and fair and often is 10, but then on the other end you have none, minus 10. General treatment by liege, inhuman and heartless, minus 25. Cruel and domineering, minus 10. Indifferent and uncaring or variable, minus 5. Just and invariable, 10. Just, kind, and invariable, 15. Positive. And then there's racial preferences, like, you know, are halflings really going to want to work with orcs? Are orcs, are half orcs? Are half orcs going to tolerate elves? Cerulean says, oh, that is a fantastic way to get rid of loot sharing metagaming. It really is. It really is. Then there's alignment adjustments. Is the chaotic evil assassin really going to want to work with a lawful good cleric or vice versa? And there's just tons of special considerations. Folks, there are so many useful tools. So many useful tools in the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide for crafting how henchmen and hirelings are going to behave under circumstances. I can't overstate how awesome it is, a system to use. Should you share the behind-the-scenes percentages? No, absolutely not. Never. Never. I've got a case in point here. Now, I'm not sure if Dan is still watching over on Facebook, but if you are, Dan, I'm not revealing anything. But my Monday night game, they're the folks that have the 24 or so fighting men in a retinue with them. No, not fighters that go into the dungeon with them. The leader of their Lightfoot troops, they recently decided to give him plate mail +1. They told him it's magical. He knows it's magical. They gave him something that's worth, and just to put this in perspective, I just want to flip back here because we're playing first edition, so this is relevant to us. They gave him a suit of armor that they could have sold. Let's see. Armor and shield. Plate mail +1. They could have sold it for 5,000 gold pieces. and they gave it to the captain of the men. While the individual men I can't speak for, he is now fanatically loyal to them. All right? They gave him something that he could never, ever hope to own. And more to the point, it's not just like, we're just going to lavish a bunch of money on you. It could save his life. They're not just saying, look, you're important enough to us to spend money on. You're important enough to us that we want to spend money, that we effectively want to spend money on you that we could keep, but with an item that will keep you alive and better protected. Paul says, it would be fun to hint at the percentages. Have the hirelings always stop talking when the PCs walk by. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You should definitely drop little hints. Or don't. We'll pay you after this done. Sure. Okay. Absolutely. Whatever. Yeah, no, I'm good. So yeah, both could be awesome, Paul. So that's the importance here. That's the degree of importance that the morale or that the loyalty of henchmen is. Now, there's a whole different system for morale that can cover monsters and non-player characters both. If we take our captain of the Lightfoot, and let's say for whatever reason the character's like, okay, troops, come into the dungeon with us, and he sees the entire party massacred despite his best efforts, he may decide that it's time to save the life of himself and his own troops. The party wasn't able to put a dent in the whatever horrible thing they were facing, and they were all slain. There are so many negatives to that even being fanatically loyal, he may fall back, retreating, and lead his troops out of there. Bitter, saddened by it, planning to come back and recover their bodies if possible someday. But the morale system of AD&D, that is a whole different discussion that we can have another time. But yeah, hinting at how much or how little an NPC likes a character, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it should be evident in their behavior. How much they do or don't like the player. See, that's one thing, like, I was commenting on this last night. One of my favorite YouTubers is a guy that goes by the name The Critical Drinker. You should absolutely subscribe to the Critical Drinker's channel, because his humorous, scatological, but in the overall unabashed critical views of films and TV shows, and occasionally video games and other pop culture, are just amazing. Critical Drinker had a piece on when he was talking about the other night. He mentioned Game of Thrones, like how he would have fixed season 8 of Game of Thrones. Now, after about the first season, I found Game of Thrones to be a hateful, ugly, mean, depressing series. Just awful. Just awful in every way. It's about awful people doing awful things, and the only decent people have awful things done to them by everyone else, you know? Like that fat beard George R.R. Martin talking about, you know, he wants to know what Aragorn's tax plan for Gondor is after he becomes... Nobody fucking cares, Martin. Don't mention yourself. Just wash your mouth out with soap. Dare mention yourself and Tolkien in the same sentence. But I digress. The point is, by the book, no one in Game of Thrones would ever do anything for anyone ever. Everyone on Game of Thrones is chaotic evil. Everyone is absolutely chaotic evil. Randomness and woe, that seems to be all anybody wants. And don't bring up Daenerys. She turns evil at the end and melts 200,000 people down. Like burns them alive. Everyone on the show was awful. Oh, I lost a couple of viewers when I started talking smack. Sorry. But the point is, though, that it does seem completely... There's like... Just... People just seem to move around randomly on the show, like they're marbles being rolled back and forth on a drumhead. There's no indication of character build-up and development. Everyone just defaults back to what they're doing at all times. And to me, that's not good. That's not entertaining. So Paul hits on a very good point. Yeah, you should have some indication about the way things are going. So there you have it in kind of an inexpert nutshell. Hirelings, henchmen, why they're important, how they should behave, and why they should behave that way. And I hope you guys have enjoyed this deep dive in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Anytime you guys want to go over, like if you're playing a newer edition of D&D and you're like, hey, did old D&D do X? Odds are that this new edition's not doing. Odds are, 1, yes it did, and 2, there's a great system, and 3, I will absolutely discuss it with you, and 4, go get yourself a Dungeon Master's Guide. I don't care what version of D&D you're DMing. This book is essential to your gameplay. It is essential to your gameplay. Everything that I just mentioned, with the creation of henchmen, with the generation of groups of hirelings, it's not going to break your second edition, your third edition, your original D&D or basic D&D, your Pathfinder, your I don't know about 4th edition. I can't say. It's not going to break those games to use these rules to create good, solid, non-player characters. Let's have a gander over at Facebook. Hey, Paul. Paul Stormberg joining us over on Facebook. Good to see you. But, yeah, whatever you do and however you do it, spice it up with some Dungeon Master's Guide from 1st edition AD&D. Spice it up with some 1st edition AD&D, period. Because I think you might be pleasantly surprised by what you'll find in these books that was perhaps not put in later editions. You want to know what happens if a character drinks a poison? Well, they die. Not necessarily. There's a whole system for poison determination in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So you should definitely get that book. Did old D&D have stats on this obscure polearm? The answer is yes. I don't know what polearm you're talking about, but yes. Now, if you listened to the replay of the Gygax interview that I did back on the 1st anniversary of the show, and I'm going to have to wrap up real soon here, guys. We've been going for like an hour and 10 minutes. One question, I lost the recording, the part of the recording with it. I had a problem with my PC right there. But I asked Gary a bunch of questions at the end. And one of the questions I asked, with tongue firmly planted in cheek, what's with all the pole arms? And he did it because, first of all, he loved medieval history and warfare. But second of all, he wanted there to be distinctions between different units. Not just like, oh, they're all pikemen. Like, these guys have got ox tongues, and these guys have got glaives, and these guys have got bill hooks, and these guys have got Volge glaives, and these guys have got guisarms, and these guys have got guisarm glaives, and so on and etc. And these dudes have spears. So yes, old D&D had stats on any obscure polearm. I promise you. On the nomenclature of polearms has been reprinted no fewer than 5 times. And a couple of those somewhat recently, in that when either Dungeon or Dragon magazine was nearing its close, they actually had Gary come in and write some guest articles, as well as Jim Ward and Rob Kuntz. And they reprinted some of Gary's articles, and one of them, I think, was on the nomenclature of polearms. But that article that originally appeared in the Dragon, well, all the numerous polearm types, I think, were in chainmail. Looking at my chainmail rules across the room, I'm not going to go get them. So they were detailed out in at least a couple of places in rule books. And in the player's handbook, there's just a whole list. In the and then there was an article on the nomenclature of polearms that was reprinted in Unearthed Arcana, that was reprinted in the Best of Dragon magazine. The polearms were remunerated in the player's handbook, and I believe the article was reprinted in Dragon magazine, and Gary explained to me why. So, to what degree do players get to control the henchmen in combat? I would say to the point where the players are trying to push them to do unreasonable things. Depending on the unreasonableness, I might make a morale check for them. But for the most part, the henchmen should be the dungeon master's players, if that makes sense. Just remember, they're individual people. They're not bomb disarming robots. They're not drones that can be flown into combat, and if they're shot down, no big deal. They're autonomous people, and you, the dungeon master, should really be the one running them, particularly if the players ask them to do exceptionally unreasonable things. So that's, you know, just consider this. If the players walk into a village and they walk up to, you know, let's say a farmhand or a milkmaid and ask them, you know, which way to the tavern, the players don't get to say, you know, on seeing our awesomeness, they just empty their pockets of any and all loot and give it to us. They don't have control over that NPC. You, the dungeon master, have control over the NPC. Treat hirelings and henchmen the same way. Like they're your characters that you are running, because they effectively are. You know, remember, you as the DM, you are you're everybody from I use the evil all the way down to a village peasant boy who might take care of the character's horses in the stable if they flip him a silver piece, which is more money than an adult would see in 2 weeks worth of work. So just remember, they're your player characters. They say they're NPCs. They're not for the players. They're for you. They're for you to run, and run them accordingly, and run them wisely. So if the players ask them to do something suicidally stupid, don't. If they say, you know, Bob the fighter will remain behind and hold off the dragon while we limp out of the dungeon, you're Bob the fighter, dungeon master. You can say, no, I'm not. I'll help carry the wounded so we can get out of here faster, but I'm not staying here and dying. And if they insist on it, well, it's time for a morale roll. And if he blows it, screw you guys and the horses you rode in on. He grabs a bag of loot and trucks out of the dungeon as fast as he can, and they never see him again. And when they go back to the town where Bob's from and try and recruit more people, it may not be quite so easy to find more people to recruit. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up for the day. I hope everyone enjoyed the live stream. Tomorrow, I was once again inspired by you guys. I was asked, let's see. Cerulean said he wasn't planning on doing so, but I might get into mini painting. So tomorrow, not only am I going to paint a little bit of minis, but I'm going to talk about what I think is a good starter selection of paints and brushes. And we'll do that, and that'll be a lot of fun. So once again, you guys are providing some of the steam power for the show. Thank you all for being here today. God bless you all. Love every one of you. Have a fantastic day. I'll see you all tomorrow. Probably be a little bit closer to noontime, the stream, rather than starting at 11:45. So peace,